Welcome back to FURYCAST. First, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and of course, smash the bell for notifications. And don't forget to sign up to the mailing list for my new graphic novel, illustrated by the world-famous Ebi Canales. Sign up now. The link is in the description. He's a former prison guard, a retired Secret Service agent, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, Judo black belt, and currently owns and operates his own dojo in Hockley, Texas, called Honor Martial Arts. Today on FURYCAST, I welcome my friend, Derrick Conkright. What's going on, Del?
How are you, sir? It's fantastic to see you, my friend.
Yeah, man, absolutely, man. I was telling you before we started recording that you're a man of mystery, so I definitely wanted to have you on the podcast. For people out there that have seen my movie, Lion Killer, posters right here. You can watch it on Amazon, Tubi TV, a lot of places. But Del was kind enough to let us use his facility to shoot one of the key scenes in the movie. And you have one of the most beautiful dojos in Houston, if not the world, in my opinion. You've got a huge facility with garage doors. It's not a garage, but it's a huge facility with huge garage doors and a pasture in the back where cows just meander around while you're rolling and doing judo. it's beautiful, man. You know, life is good.
Very kind. Yeah, you're very, very kind. I think we're pretty lucky to have what we have, and someday hopefully we can make it bigger and have the ability to have nature in the background, kind of like you mentioned, on nice days where we can roll the doors open and enjoy the wind as it blows through, and you feel closer to the martial arts that you're training in instead of just sitting in a metal building, which is basically what we are. But when you open the doors, it's like nature comes in, and you feel more attached to God in some ways. But it's just a beautiful feeling.
Yeah, that's definitely the feeling I got. Absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. Let's go back and tell me like where you grew up and how you first got interested in pursuing the martial arts.
Yes, sir. So basically, I'll go back before me. Basically, my father, who I'm named after, he started learning judo from his brother. His brother was in the military and was stationed in Japan, and he started learning judo, and that was back in the 60s. And so when he returned back to the States, he started a judo school at Central Michigan University, where my father also attended. And so my father started training with him. So in my youth, around 4, my parents divorced. And so, my father had purchased a wrestling mat, put in our basement. So my sister, my stepbrother and sister, we would go down there and learn some techniques from my father. And some of my friends would say when I was a kid, I was always trying to throw them in the front yard when we were playing. I don't remember that, but I definitely remember wrestling around with my brothers and sisters and stuff like that. And so I always kind of wanted to follow in my father's footsteps, but because of we moved to Texas when I was 10. We were away from my father, so we'd see him during the summers, but I really didn't have a chance to train with him or learn anything other than when we were very young. So it was always something that I wanted to do. So I was a prison guard in college. And so
let me ask a little bit more about your dad, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
So he was a judo black belt and competitor. So
he started as I mentioned, with my uncle, and then later he started training in Flint, Michigan. We lived near there, and so his instructor ended up moving to Hawaii. And so he was supposed to get his black belt. He traveled there to get his black belt. He ended up getting sick while he was there, and so he never really got it. So then I want to say maybe 10 years ago or so, he came and started training with me a little bit here in spring, where I was going to the school, Hard Knocks. My instructor was very kind enough.
Actually, I've seen that school off the freeway.
Yes, sir.
And I'm curious about that school. Is it as advertised? Because when I started judo, it was through some Iranian expats who trained a very hard style of judo. Is the School of Hard Knocks, is that very similar to my experience?
So the head instructor is Andy Conley. He's an eighth Dan in judo and has been doing it the majority of his life. He started, I think, when he was 11 or 12, and now he's in his 60s, I believe. And I started training with him in 2010. I was looking for another location to train at. To make a long story short, I basically was training with Carl Geiss, and he basically,
The legendary Carl Geiss, he kicked you out. Just say it.
Exactly. I
Okay.
got kicked out for being rough, which
Every
is funny
let,
because
let me pause there. How did I know that? Because everybody gets kicked out of Carl Geiss's school. He is a legendary, famous judoka who I started with Daryl Craig. And I guess you could say Carl Geiss is a contemporary of Daryl Craig. They're kind of cut from the same cloth, old school judo guys. But everybody I know eventually got kicked out of Carl Geiss's school. From somebody who's been, I don't say I've ever been kicked out of a school. I say, we came to a mutual agreement that I would no longer train there. It always makes me feel good that, hey, I'm not the only one.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's a whole nother story. When I first started training judo as an adult, basically, I for a very short time, I was going to Sam Houston State, and I went to their judo school, which was off campus. It was a club for probably 2 weeks, right? Basically between the time that I was finishing my degree and I had quit. I'd quit working as a prison guard, which I did for about 4 years, all the way through college. And then, strangely enough, I wanted to do a movie. So basically, Kevin Costner was doing a movie here in Houston, and a friend and I went to the casting call. And I basically got a call, and they said, "Yeah, we'd like you to come and do a weekend for this movie." And so I went to my boss and said, "Hey, I'd like to take a leave of absence for," I think it was like a week or 2 weeks. And they said, we can't let you do that. Somebody else wanted to do it. We told her no, so we have to tell you no. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to put in a resignation just so I can do this movie kind of thing.
Commitment.
So and so that's what I did. I basically resigned. It gave me like 2 weeks to actually be a college student, do things that college students do. I played volleyball in front of the apartment complex, stuff like that, and joined this club. So the guy that was teaching there basically said, "Oh yeah, you should look up when you go back to Houston, Carl Geiss. That's where I used to train." So when I returned to Houston, I did exactly that. I looked him up, went to his school, and it was fantastic. I mean, the place was packed full of, every class had, I don't know, 30 or more black belts. They were all fantastic. They were a pleasure to practice with, learn all these new and innovative techniques and stuff like that. And there were all kinds of kids, there were all kinds of women. A lot of the women there were training for the Olympics or had, trying to get to a world championship, all kinds of just amazing stuff.
He's the real deal. Yeah,
absolutely. And this was in like 1995, I think, somewhere in there. So I started training there, and then I got the job with the Secret Service. I got very busy, and at some point I thought, this just isn't going to work. I feel like if I'm going to be committed to judo, I need to be there more than once every couple of weeks, because I was really traveling a lot for campaigns and stuff like that. So I basically stopped going. Several years later, I got back into judo. So I thought, I'll just go back to Carl Geiss's, So I go there, and I open the door, walk in, and there's like 8 people for class. It was really weird. There were no kids, there were no females. It was all, all basically guys. And so I was really surprised. And so I kind of talked to some of the other students, and they were mentioning that, I guess, one of the women had made some claim against him, or said he did something. And so he's like, okay, no more women. And then something happened with one of the kids. So he's like, no more kids. So
no more adult males. Just him in a room.
Yeah, obviously that was the next thing is I was watching people get in trouble for things. And it was really really surprising. He would start yelling at somebody like, what did you do that for? I've been watching you. You know, who do you think you are? You're going to hurt somebody. And he'd go on this 15-minute, just yelling at the guy, and everybody was just kind of sitting around blinking their eyes. And so at one point we were training a certain technique. Basically he would come in the middle of the class, and somebody else was really teaching the class, but he would come in and teach some technique. And so he said, okay, I want you to try this technique. It's very, very dangerous, so don't be rough with it. Just try the technique and switch partners or whatever. So I'm there with a black belt, and at the time I was a brown belt. So I'm doing the technique, and basically all it was is the guy would, you're holding their gi, you're in their guard basically, and then the person puts their arm across and grabs their own lapel. So not really dangerous, but according to him, it was dangerous.
Well,
so
just a cross lapel choke from inside the guard.
Believe it or not, there was no choke involved. All it was holding their arm down by holding your own gi, and then their arm was underneath yours if they had a grip. And I guess he was implying that somebody could hurt their wrist or something like that.
Yeah.
So the partner I was with says, hey, hold a little harder. I want to see if I can get out. And I said, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, hold a little harder. So I hold a little harder. He's like, no, really give it some gusto. So, I give it some gusto, and then all of a sudden, Sensei Geis comes running over. He's like, what are you doing? You're going to hurt him. Stop that, and so after he left, he says to me like, hey, thanks for taking one for the team. I'm like, dude, why didn't you say you asked me to, everybody was kind of gun shy around him because nobody wanted to get kicked out, obviously. And at the time he had the best mats, he had homemade spring floors that he'd made in the 60s. And he had a cotton tarp over the top that was just phenomenal for foot sweeps and very, very enjoyable for judo in general. And so a couple weeks go by, and basically there was a guy teaching at the time who he called himself Ninja. So this guy, the way that Geis liked our randori was everybody's, kind of throwing each other. You throw a couple times, he throws a couple times. It's not one person just dominating the entire thing. And so this guy would throw me like 5 times. I'd throw him once. He'd throw me 5 times. I'd throw him once. And all of a sudden I'm the guy getting yelled at, I saw you blocking those throws. Who do you think you are? You're going to hurt somebody. He's 60, you're, 30. Went through the whole thing. And I think I got, he talked for like 15 minutes, and he's like, you need to leave, go change and don't come back. And so I'm like, okay. So I went and started changing, and, the guy came to apologize. He's like, don't go in there and talk to Dell. He knows what he did. And so it was kind of crazy. And then another guy came in and said, hey, just call him in a couple weeks and kiss his behind, and basically he'll let you come back. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. So I just started looking for a better place. I found the School of Hard Knocks at that time, and I found Anderson Leal was teaching at his own judo club, basically. Anderson at the time was training for the World Championship in Tokyo, which he did go to for the open class. Absolutely amazing judoka. And then, of course, Andy Conley that I mentioned, he's an 8th Dan at the School of Hard Knocks. I think he was a 7th at the time. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience. I think he's probably one of the higher ranks in Texas also. So a lot of people like to go to him because it helps them to get promoted down the line if they're a black belt. Super helpful. It's a wealth of knowledge. So he's been a pleasure, and I've been going there for about 14 years now. So worked out in the end.
I was about to say Daryl Craig. Carl Geis. Yeah, this I'm always interested in the stories. There's plenty of them.
He received his 10th Dan close to when he passed away from the United States Judo Association.
I didn't know Carl Geis he passed away.
He passed away. I want to say it's been a while now, maybe 5 to 7 years ago. It's been a while. And
is the school still going?
So his school splintered. There were 2 groups. One group stayed behind. Another group basically went on to start their own school, and they're all a lot of them that are left behind are older guys that basically remember the heyday kind of thing. And some of them he also did Aikido, so he was a 10th dan in Aikido. Some of them are Aikido players, some of them are in Judo, but sadly it's nothing like it used to be. The people that continue to stay there at his facility rent from Mr. Geis's wife.
Mm-hmm.
So he got married later in life or remarried later in life, but his facility probably looks exactly like it did before.
Wow.
So, and my story really is entwined with him, not because I went and trained with him and I wasn't anything special there or anything like that, but when I would go, sometimes we would if you were sitting there to take a break or something or waiting on class, he would come out and sit down, and sometimes he would tell stories about when he was in Japan or different things. And at one point I remember him saying to me that when people were coming from the military back in the 60s, coming back to the United States, and they would start their own schools, a lot of them would go to strip centers and they would start renting. And then over their life, their rent kept going up. They might increase the number of students that they had, but eventually when they were close to retirement, say 35 years later, 40 years later, and they wanted to retire, they really didn't have anything as an investment. They didn't really have the money to have a decent 401k. They didn't have a retirement plan or anything like that. And so they could try to sell their school. But for instance, the instructor you had, I believe he tried to do that, and nobody was really interested in his family of taking over the school. And from what I understand, it just kind of closed. I don't think he was able to sell it to anybody. And so what do you have for retirement, if you weren't smart about investments and stuff like that? So Sensei Geis basically said what he did was he came back to the United States. He bought a small piece of land. He built a house on it. He and his wife lived in that house, and then behind it, he built his dojo. Then I don't know how many years later, he ended up divorcing his wife. From what I understand, he said in the divorce, "Why don't you take the house? I'll take the dojo, and we'll call it even." And so, from what I understand, that's what happened. So he basically took a portion of his dojo, turned it into like an apartment, and that's where he lived the entire rest of his life. So I want to say maybe 50 years he lived in his dojo in a side little room that he built. One of his students, his name was Pollard. His last name was Pollard. He lived with him for a while also. He was a military guy. He came back, just a huge, burly, amazing guy. And so he lived there at the dojo also. The two of them would come out in their gis, and they would throw you around like crazy and then go back into his little apartment there, and that was it. But
is there anything more sensei like than that?
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I did exactly that. I thought, well, he told me he could sell his dojo. I think when I talked to him about it, that was, I don't know, 30 years or something ago. He said he basically had the ability to sell that building, and he could make, whatever, $1 million. Because at the time, he bought that land. It was in the middle of nowhere on the very edge of Houston. And I don't even think Beltway 8 had been built, or they started to build it, and it was, very new to the area. And so I did the same thing. I basically went out far enough where I could afford the land. We had friends that lived out here. And so I wanted to do that same idea, so that if I decided to retire or I want to sell the business, I actually have something to sell, not just a client list like, hey, here are our students, and please pay me a bunch of money for this list. It made more sense to me.
It's a beautiful space. I'd hate to see you retire and a lawn company buy that space and put a bunch of lawnmowers in it. I'd bring a tear to my eye. But so let's go back a little bit. So you're a kid, you're in Michigan. What age did you come to Houston?
So I was 10, And basically, at the time, a lot of the auto industry plants were shutting down. Part of it was the whole idea of the foreign vehicles for the first time were making headway. When they first started making, say, Datsuns and vehicles like that, they really were kind of throwaway cars. They would last a very short period of time and then they kind of fall apart. And so they weren't very popular. But then the price was so much better than the American cars. A lot of people started buying those. And I just had a discussion with my uncle, Dave Hellman. He worked for Ford for many, many years. He mentioned a gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he went to Ford and said, "Hey, I noticed a lot of your things kind of fall apart or break. I'd love to work with you. I have some ideas to make vehicles last longer." And they were like, "Yeah, we don't need your help. We're doing fine." And apparently he went to Toyota or a company like that. And they were like, "Yeah, we'd love your information." So he basically convinced them to build their cars that would last longer. And so people started buying foreign cars more. So Michigan, the main thing there was the auto industry at the time. And so they started basically laying off people. With that, they started laying off teachers because they just didn't have the money or the tax base for the schools anymore. And so my mother was a teacher. She was laid off. And so I think somebody put on the bulletin board, like, "Hey, go to Texas. They're hiring." And so that's what she did. She found a couple places that were hiring in Houston, applied, came down here. And that's why we ended up here when I was 10.
What part of town did you end up in?
In Spring. So originally she found an apartment off of 45, and as we were driving in, there was a kid with a line of fish that he just caught, and he was slapping them against the ground. And we went a little farther, and there's a kid hitting something with a brick. And then we got in our apartment, and a couple of weeks later, some guy just randomly walked in. He had the key to our apartment, and my mother's like, "Okay, we're out of here." So she found a house kind of in the 249 area, Spring Cypress area. And so that's kind of where I grew up, went to Klein High School. So.
And did you pursue the martial arts as a kid?
We were relatively on the poor end of things, so we really couldn't afford it. And
same here.
And so it ended up being something that I had to, try to do as an adult. And I always tell people, if you can start as a kid, you're always going to be better than those of us who start later in life. It's just, it becomes kind of part of you if you can do it at your age. So I remember seeing a little kid that would go to Geis's, and his mother was fantastic at judo. And he would run around the mat. So Geis had this little harness he would put on her, or on the kid, and then attach it to him, and he could only run back and forth. He couldn't get on the mat, but he could run back and forth across the front. And his mother would come over and do a couple foot sweeps with him, and you could tell that kid was going to be a fantastic judo player someday. So I always like to try to do that when kids are very young, to first start doing foot sweeps with them, get them used to falling down, and they realize it's not a very big deal, and then they really start to enjoy judo from a very young age.
Yeah, I think rough and tumble play is really missing in especially young males' lives today. So the sooner you can get them acclimated to that and get them in a good martial arts program, really, I mean, it's the best incubator for so many attributes you need in life.
Yes, sir.
Just manhood in general. So then your journey, like you mentioned earlier, you got into the Secret Service. Did you go in the military first, or?
So what I ended up doing was I found out that at the end of the time I was in school, I could do an internship if you had a decent GPA. And so I had done a speech on the Secret Service. And at the time, we didn't have the internet, things like that. So you had to go find books. And I went to the university library, and I think there were 2 books, and they weren't very good. But I got enough material to basically do this speech. And so I always kind of wanted to be a police officer. So I thought, that'd be an interesting job. I think around that time you had several Secret Service movies that portrayed them as a very good agency to be a member of. So I kind of went that direction. I did an internship with the service, and at the time you applied directly with the agency's office. Now you have to go through usajobs.gov. So it's a little different. It's not as friendly, I guess. If you don't meet the criteria, it automatically sends you an email saying, thanks, but no thanks kind of thing.
Yeah, you can't get in front of them and convince them they like the cut of your jib and you could be a good. But this was the Secret Service. This wasn't law. This wasn't Houston Police Department. This was the Secret Service.
Yes, sir. The Secret Service is a federal agency. And so at the time, they always prefer you to have law enforcement experience or military experience. A lot of it is very beneficial because the things that you do are related to those things, using the radio, being able to handcuff people, being physical with people, interviewing people, the things that are necessary. Being a police officer or being in the military definitely helps you. And being a member of a team, that type of thing. So I always recommend people, if they want to apply with the service, to try to get that experience because it does help you. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be a good special agent. It just means you have a kind of a foot up on the other people. When I was applying, basically, a lot of people were retiring when there was a large hiring push when Kennedy was assassinated. And so a lot of those people started retiring around the time I was applying. So they kind of loosened up the application process at the time. So they weren't requiring you to definitely have a certain amount of military or law enforcement experience, which definitely helped me. But they were impressed that I was a prison guard. I started at the age of 19. So, that.
Well, in Huntsville, you were a prison guard in Huntsville, or?
Yes, sir. There's about 20 some prisons there, maybe more at this time. But at the time I was at the Ferguson unit, which was one of the worst. It was kind of a gladiator prison, a lot of fights. Almost every shift you had a fight or two. You had riots during the summer because, tensions would get high and it would be hot. No AC, you're in there. Basically, if you were a prison guard, you were working on a block, and that block had 155 inmates, and it was just you and them. And then you had another officer that had the keys to that block, so they'd let them in and out for different things like going to work or going to the craft shop, going to the gym, things like that. So it wasn't an easy job, but it basically it teaches you a lot of things. It can kind of harden your heart a little bit. So if you're a person that is kind, I don't recommend it. It's not enjoyable in any way, shape, or form. I don't think I've ever run into anybody who said, "Yeah, I really enjoy being a prison guard." So, but it paid the bills and got me through college.
So you went from there to the Secret Service. I'm interested in what does an intern at the Secret Service do?
So at the time, and I assume they still have them, it gives you the ability to be in the office, number one. So you're helping with paperwork, different things. You also are able to see the agents, what they do on a day-to-day basis. If there was a visit in town, they would usually allow you to go on the visit in one of the vehicles in the motorcade and see how protection is done. I was really lucky. One of the agents had a very, very important case at the time. And so the person that was my supervisor said, "Hey, you're going to go with this guy, and everything that he does, you're going to do." So for several weeks, I walked around with him, went everywhere he went. He interviewed some people. I was able to go to his trial, and it was 5 family members. So the United States Attorney allowed me to be there through the entire process. I was there to help with like the voir dire or picking the people that they were going to try to exclude from being on the jury. Basically, I was able to do a lot of things that would be very unusual for a regular intern to do. And then I was there for the entire trial, and I think it lasted around a week. And this investigator or this special agent that had this case, he did a fantastic job. It was basically a counterfeit check case. And at the time, it was I want to say that it was unusual technologies for somebody to be able to figure out how to make these counterfeit checks. And they had rented a computer from, one of these rental places, used the computer and then wiped it and then turned it back in. But there was still the expert that they had to do the forensic search on the computer still found bits and parts of the counterfeit checks and the different things that they had done. So it was a very interesting trial. Each family member had their own defense attorney, and so it was interesting seeing 5 different defense attorneys in their different angles to try to get their client off. I to this day I remember one of them. We went on this long story about the Klingons in Star Trek.
The Klingon defense.
Yeah, literally, it went on for they each had something like 45 minutes to do their final speech, and I think 40 of it was him telling people about the Klingons, and then he gets finished, and his whole thing was it was make believe, just like the prosecutor's case. The whole thing was make believe, and of course, all 5 family members were found guilty. So it was a really interesting case. So that's really what the intern process allowed you to do, is see every part of what a special agent does and to kind of see if that's something you wanted to do. But it also allows the agency an opportunity to see if you're somebody that they want to hire, if that makes any sense. So
Absolutely.
if, for instance, if a couple times they took me to the range, and if I had said like, oh, I don't like to handle guns, they're like, okay, we're not going to hire Dell. He doesn't want to handle guns. Believe it or not, that happened once. One of the interns she was afraid to use a gun, and so they were like, well, that's a big part of what we do. We can't hire you. I'm sorry, but at the time,
tell the bad guy to stop. Sometimes, you try. I'm sure.
Absolutely, and it's a lot different now than it was back then, because a lot of society, they have negative connotations of law enforcement. So
yeah, that really flipped in the last 5 years, right? I guess right as you were getting ready to retire. But first, real quick, what is the actual definition of what a Secret Service agent does? Like, what's the definition?
So you're actually hired as a criminal investigator. So the definition is basically, I would say, a person that does criminal investigations and then does protection for the president, vice president, heads of other countries when they enter the United States, certain diplomats that are given protection by the president, and then former presidents. And that's kind of, if you're not doing protection, you're doing investigation. So for instance, an agent here in Houston, they would be doing counterfeit investigations, bank fraud, identity fraud, different computer crimes, things like that. So
if you're a bad guy, you don't just have to worry about local law enforcement, FBI. You also have to worry about the Secret Service coming after you.
And that's kind of, it depends on what crimes you violate and what agencies are going to come and take a look at you. So for instance, if somebody decides they're going to gun run, or basically sell guns, the Secret Service is probably not going to come and arrest you if there's no connection to any of our protectees. But for instance, the ATF would come.
Yeah, they come after you.
You have drugs, the Secret Service isn't going to come and look at you. But we had a task force here in Houston, and basically I was a member for many years, and it was not only the Secret Service, but we had connections to the FBI, the IRS, immigration, the sheriff's department, Houston Police Department, all the local agencies also. And so we would basically look for certain crimes that fit what we would do, which were usually financial crimes. And we all kind of work together. So if it wasn't a crime that I could charge federally, then it might be something that could be charged, via state crime, and then HPD or the sheriff's office would go ahead and do the charge. I would still write up the paperwork because it was in our task force, but it allowed us all kind of to work together.
So you said a minute ago about how, I guess, the public's perception in law enforcement has changed. I view that like maybe it's changed in the last 5 years, but you were on the inside of that. This change, have you been feeling it before then? When did you
I
first
want to
start
say
feeling? Yeah,
it's probably been a little less than that, but it's sad because I think the majority of the people in law enforcement that I know, their their main goal is to try to help their city, state, you know, their country, whatever it may be, and they're very, very helpful. That's a big part of policing is feeling like the good guy with the white hat trying to save people, help people, do things for people. I saw a recent meme, and I think the meme was talking about a police officer who had been called because a woman had stolen 4 eggs to try to feed her kids. The guy basically, instead of arresting her, bought her a bunch of groceries and took them over to her house. I think a lot of law enforcement are like that. I think they, a big part of their life is to try to help people. Why would you be willing to give your life for your job if it wasn't to help people? And that's a big part of law enforcement is any
yeah,
time you could be shot, you could be stabbed, you could be run over or injured. And it's sad to see kind of the route that a lot of people are taking. And it seems like it, you know, the people that I worked with during my career, I worked with a lot of police officers, a lot of federal agents. It was never about race, and I think that's become or kind of been brought to the forefront. Is they're trying to make a lot of law enforcement out to be racist, which is sad. You know, a lot of my friends were all different races during the time that I'm in my career, and we weren't in cliques that were in that clique because of our race. It was always just, if you're a nice person, people want to be friends with you on the
yeah.
job and off the job. So
You think it's mostly media created, or
I think a lot of it is media created. I think a lot of it is politics, and I don't want to bore you with the politics of it, but I really feel like there's been a dramatic push in the last several years to basically, for instance, to try to make Republicans look racist, and I think that's also very sad to see that because how do you defend it? You see it with interviews about Trump. The person gets interviewed and they say, "Is Trump a racist?" "Oh yeah, he's a racist." "Okay, well, what did he do that was racist?" "Well, I don't remember anything." It was like,
yeah,
okay, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I just hate to
yeah,
see it.
yeah. I tell everybody, it's like racist is calling someone racist is like the worst, one of the worst things you could call somebody. You got to come with some evidence, bro. And I'm talking about just if you're telling me if my coworker's racist, you got to really like pack the evidence on because I'm not of the opinion that, your respect is earned. I'm going to respect you off the top. Maybe your disrespect is earned. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
as soon as I meet you, you're a person you're created in God's image, and I respect you and I see value in who you are as a human being. Now you can mess that up, you know what I mean? But it's got to be there's got to be evidence, um, so on and so forth. So towards the end of your tenure with the Secret Service, um, did you experience any of that, or you were just kind of maybe getting out at the right time, maybe?
well, when I was a prison guard, it was very common that the inmates would use different race negative words all the time. I mean, I was constantly white boy this, white boy that. The majority of the time that I was a prison guard, and so you just kind of
That's to be
sloughed it off.
expected, yeah.
Yeah, you just kind of brushed it off, and it wasn't a big deal. With the Secret Service, you find in all the federal agencies basically that there was a big push to try to promote different races over white people. So you'd actually find that people were getting promoted. You got graded for your promotions, and then they would basically pick who the person was going to be. And you thought, oh well, if I have the best score, I should be the person that gets picked for my first choice on these positions, but it wasn't really happening. They were really for instance, the Secret Service was getting sued by a group of black agents for what they were claiming was they weren't getting promoted fast enough. Well, a lot of the people that were suing were highly promoted already, and so that was happening in other agencies. But you could the whole thing with that is, I would love to see it where if you just deserve to be promoted, you get promoted, but that's really not the real world. So, I never had anybody call me names or anything like that with the Secret Service per se, but you could see it behind the scenes though. There were still groups of agents, like there was a Hispanic group of agents, there's a black group of agents that they tried to get favor for different things that they were pushing for in the Secret Service over the years. And I hated to see that, because like, hey, we're all just agents, can we just be agents? But
yeah. Now, would you consider the majority of your time there as positive, and would you recommend it?
It's really tough now because of the whole thing with kind of wokeism and the whole thing, push against law enforcement. It would be.
So do you think the Secret Service went woke?
I think part of it has basically gone woke, and some people may disagree, but the director and the higher supervisors, they have a difficult position where they're not really supposed to be political, but in the long run, the president is the one who chooses who the director is going to be. So, if they upset the president of the United States, they're basically going to get removed. So they have to be, kind of careful, and they kind of walk on eggshells.
Yeah, you have to be political, I guess, when you're at a certain level.
Absolutely.
So let's get back to your martial arts journey. When did you come back to judo? And has it always been judo only for you?
So I started in judo basically because I kind of wanted to follow my father's footsteps, and trying to learn how to throw people, and then also do the groundwork seemed very enjoyable to me. It's something that it's like wrestling around. As a kid, you like to wrestle around.
Yeah.
Sensei Geis mentioned that it's kind of like, as an adult, it's kind of like playing in the sandbox for us to do judo. And so I wanted to always try to follow that and try to learn judo. So as I mentioned, I started, and then I've done some. When I started the school here, basically I started training in my driveway and teaching some family members and stuff like that. That was around 2011 or so.
Were you a black belt already, or?
I got my black belt around that time. And so I basically, when I built the facility, I asked my brother-in-law, he was a black belt in karate, in Shotokan karate, if he was interested in teaching here, because I didn't want to go find somebody else. He's excellent at Shotokan karate. And basically 3 of my brother-in-laws all did Shotokan karate underneath Orlando Redwood, and he's absolutely phenomenal. He's going to turn 70 this year. So I started training karate with my brother-in-law, Gilbert Valdez, and then he started training judo with me. I was originally teaching as the head instructor for judo here. So it was more of a family kind of thing. So it was enjoyable. A lot of my family members were training here. And so my brother-in-law, after he got a job that it was making it difficult for him to show up for classes, he asked Sensei Redwood to start teaching here. And so he's been teaching here since then. So I've been doing that. And then several years ago, we have a friend of mine who is teaching high jump here. It's Hugo Munoz. He basically is a former Olympic high jumper from Peru. And so he's also very, very good at jiu-jitsu. And he and I were talking, and he said, you should try to get a jiu-jitsu school to train here also. So I was hesitant. I had a friend that has a school nearby, and I didn't really want him to feel like I was trying to compete with him. But literally the next day, Dean Zano, he's with Lone Star Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. he called me on the phone, said that they had driven by and they were looking for a place to move to because the school they had at the time was in a bad part of a shopping center. I guess there was like a illegal casino on one side and a bar on the other, and he was looking for a place more family friendly. And so I met with him, and basically we had a discussion. It seemed like you'd be a perfect addition for Honor Martial Arts. So that was about 3 years ago. They started training here, and Dean's been a fantastic addition to Honor Martial Arts. And he already had a student base, so it wasn't like he had to start from scratch. So I started training in Jiu-Jitsu with him. So it's been a lot of fun. Obviously, Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, it's basically all the same stuff. So it's just what you want to specialize in. You want to specialize on the groundwork, or you want to specialize on the stand-up. So
are you enjoying your jiu-jitsu journey?
I really am. It's been a lot of fun. It's a different group of people. A lot of them are older. I'm also helping with the kids classes, so it's fun to see the kids learn and grow. But overall, it couldn't have been a better fit. Dean has a very relaxed style, and so it's, I think if it was a person that was all business and no fun, it just wouldn't be enjoyable. But Lone Star Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really has a fun side. They like to party and have a good time, and they're a lot of them are kind of older like I am, so they're not trying to kill you all the time.
It's old man BJJ. That what have you ranked up in BJJ yet?
I've got a purple belt with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Dean, and then
purple belt's a big deal.
I'm trying, and then Dean is basically I think he's a second Dan underneath Darren McCall with McCall Mixed Martial Arts
out in Humble, right? I believe he's out in Humble, yeah.
Absolutely. And then he's underneath Brazilian top team with Professor Bustamante. So he's got a lot of experience, fantastic instructor, and his school is definitely growing, doing really well. He might be another excellent person to interview down the road.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember when he was a brown belt. Yeah, so he's been around for a while. So you've got the facility. So you said this was like 2011. You got the black belt. That's when you started building, around 2011.
So I started teaching in my driveway, and then we started building the facility in 2014 and finished it around 2015.
How do you teach judo in your driveway? Just pull mats out in the driveway and.
Exactly. So what I did is I went to Sensei Conley and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about teaching. Is that okay?" You always kind of want to ask your instructor, so they give you permission. He said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I basically went online, found some Daimler mats on eBay or something like that at a discount, so I wasn't killing myself, and got the 3 big rollout ones, and they were kind of an ugly yellow color, and we basically take them into the driveway, roll them out. We didn't tape them together or anything, and we just start class. It was horrendous being thrown on them because it felt like you were being thrown on a piece of tape on the sidewalk.
Yeah, it's probably 1.5 inch thick on top of concrete.
Exactly. It was not enjoyable, but most of them stuck with it until we got to the new facility. But
how did you get students?
A lot of it was family members at first. And so it was a couple, a niece and a nephew, my brother-in-laws and my wife, kind of that kind of thing. And then I think a few other people that started back then. And then we basically just moved it over to the facility. And we basically have a spring floor that we built with gymnastic springs. And then it's covered with tatami mats. And it's worked out really well for us. It's been a fantastic mat, and I definitely recommend it. Some people will ask me, like, what should I do? Should I get the foam blocks or should I get the springs? And I always tell them, no, get the springs. It's well worth it. And then later I'll ask them, like, what did you go with? Oh, I got the foam blocks. I'm like,
yeah, foam blocks are more. I have been on some spring mats. Wasn't at Geis's, but at some other schools. But I was on your. It didn't feel, it didn't feel like a gymnastic spring mat. It felt more sturdy, I guess you could say.
It's basically a fantastic subfloor. I contacted the maker of these springs, and they basically recommended the certain number of springs per board for judo. So they'd already had people contact them in the past. Geiss's was actually built with springs from engines.
Hmm.
And so I tried to duplicate that. So I basically bought some springs from different companies, and they showed up and they were nothing close to what we needed. I'm not sure. I guess people that were there back in the 60s could tell you exactly the type of springs, but the Palmer springs are the ones that I purchased, and they've really worked out well. And that's the thing is, you don't realize how helpful they are until you were thrown. So I remember you moving around during the filming of your movie. I don't remember you being thrown on it, and I doubt anybody would be able to throw you. But
You could,
the
I'm sure.
feeling, well, the feeling when you hit the mat is it's a firm surface, but underneath you gives enough where it just
It
has
lessens that impact.
a completely unusual feeling compared to the foam
Hmm.
blocks
Hmm.
or concrete. It's just you're when you hit the Daimler right on top of concrete, you're like, why did I even come here? You know what I mean? It's a very
Well,
very
that's what
hard
I
feeling.
was wondering. So how did you build from there? The driveway with the, I guess we're getting this another interest of mine, which is like building a martial arts business. How do you go from that step to convincing people, hey, uh, invite your friends and we'll build this thing out?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because around that same time, I had a friend that he wanted to start teaching also. And so he decided he was going to start teaching some family members and some local kids in his garage. And so he's like, "Hey, would you like to come?" And I wanted to kind of help him. So it was way across town. I drove across, and we're literally doing judo in his some he bought some mats that were tatami and just right on his cement floor in his garage. Like, how do you convince people, hey, come to my garage and I'll throw you around and try to choke you? It's just, to me,
Yeah.
that's an even more unusual situation. But, the first day I showed up and I was ready for class, and he's like, "Hey, Dell, I have no idea what to do. Why don't you teach?" And I'm like, "Okay." So I'm teaching his class in his garage, for several months until he kind of got his bearing and figured out how he wanted to run his class and stuff like that. But and he was exceptional at judo. He did a lot of competition stuff like that. But at least when you have a facility and you're inviting somebody over, it's just not as unusual as like, "Hey, come in my driveway or come in my
Yeah.
garage." And so I really try to use Facebook a lot and try to show pictures. And that's basically how you and I became friends. I don't remember the exact date, but I want to say it was at least 10 years ago or longer that you and I became friends on Facebook. And then, if I recall, I think you saw some of the photos with the sunsets in the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to do, is draw in people like, hey, this isn't just you're not just looking out at concrete in the parking lot. It gives you something, a little more spiritual, a little more enjoyable. And believe it or not, I don't think I ever got a single student through that medium. I don't think a single person came and said, "Hey, I saw pictures on Facebook and here I am to train." I tried Twitter, things like that. So what I found is a lot of you have to use like postcards. You have to come up with advertising like that. Dean Zano is fantastic at bringing in people, just because he's kind of a big part of him is kind of a salesman. So
Yeah.
he's good at convincing people, "Hey, come in and try the school and see if you like it," kind of thing. I was never really good at that. So I'm sure our school could have been a lot better if I was a better salesman. But somebody like you can kind of draw people in. You're good at talking, and I've just never had that. But I enjoy coming here, and I basically have it set up now where there's three instructors doing the three martial arts that we have, and I can just show up, help with the different schools, and enjoy it. And I don't feel the pressure to try to draw in new students.
Now, did you say you're no longer the head judo instructor?
So Jesse Martin is a seasoned veteran competitor with judo, and several years ago, I knew him when he was in the School of Hard Knocks, and basically asked him if he would like to teach here. I was still traveling a lot for work, and every time I would have a trip, it was going to be 3 weeks or something. I would have to cancel class, and for 3 weeks, it was just becoming difficult for me at the time. So Jesse also has an exceptional background in competition style of judo, and so I knew that would be helpful for the students here, and that translates over to jiu-jitsu. So you can find him on Facebook, and he has a lot of competitions in jiu-jitsu where he throws somebody with judo,
Mhm.
but you can see the when he's throwing the person, he's being careful not to hurt him, like giving him an opportunity to fall properly instead of just pounding him, which he
Yeah.
has the ability to do. So that's a nice part about judo is, you're trying to protect your uke, or the person that you're throwing. And, Jesse's been a big part of our school just because of his skill, and he's just an exceptional person. So it's been a pleasure to have him around, and everything that I learned from him, it's helpful for me because I can kind of see the difference in his style of judo compared to my style of judo, which I'm more of a person that likes to do a hobby style of judo instead of just, trying to pound people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. With my knees, I miss judo so much. With my knees, it's always like, man, it's not so much the falling; it's the constant getting up with my knees. It's like, oh,
Sure.
crack, crack every time you got to stand up. But how do you feel? Judo, the sport of jiu-jitsu has changed a lot in the last, several years. How do you feel about that? You think it's going in a positive direction or a negative direction?
You know, I live in somewhat of a bubble where I don't go to the international competitions for jiu-jitsu, and I don't go to the international competitions for judo. And so I kind of, I like the old style of judo where you could grab the legs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I understand the reason why they took out a lot of the leg grabs. They wanted to see more stand up judo, and then not people just bent over, trying to keep from being thrown,
They
or
want to see big throws, right? For
they want to
television
see
purposes,
big
right?
hip throws and things like that. They didn't want
Like
to
a
see.
fireman's carry isn't it exciting though, or what? I mean,
Well, what was happening was a lot of single leg takedowns, double leg takedowns, things like that from a lot of the Russian players. And so
mhm.
I think Japan and Europe have always kind of been in charge of what happens internationally in competition. And I think they were looking for more of like the Uchimatas, the Tayatoshis, Ippon Sonagis, stuff like that. And they just weren't seeing that as much. They were seeing a lot of dominant wrestlers coming in and doing judo, and all they were doing is, shooting for single leg, double legs, and then you're missing out on a lot of the enjoyable throws of judo. And so you, as an instructor of judo, you still have to teach those things. The Morote garis, which is a double leg takedown, the things like that, the kata gatami that you or kata gruma that you mentioned, those type of throws where you have to grab the leg. You still teach those, and you still need to learn those to get your black belt, if that makes any sense. It's just you
Mhm.
can't use them in competition. And a big portion of judo isn't just, going to competitions. I remember reading Dr. Kano's book. He's the one who invented judo, and he mentions a student that came into him and said, "Hey, I just fought 30 tournaments, and I won in all of them." And you know, he was like, "Well, what have you done with this, or what have you done with that?" And the guy was like, "I really haven't. I've been too busy with these competitions." And he's like, "Well, the competition side of it wasn't super important with Dr. Kano." He's like,
Yeah.
"What else have you done for your for your students, or what else have you done for judo? Not just trying to get trophies or whatever." And so a lot of judo is helping your community or helping your students, learn and feel a part of something, and the um, you know being able to become self-sufficient as a kid into adulthood, being able to keep in good shape, those type of things. So judo in general for me, it definitely is a self-defense. in law enforcement, you always want to stay on your feet. You don't necessarily want to end up on the ground unless you're handcuffing somebody, with your knee on their back or something where you're handcuffing them. But you don't want to just go right for the ground, So if you're being attacked by multiple attackers, obviously you end up on the ground, you're gonna be kicked, and so you want to basically try to throw one person into another, get some space, and judo is really helpful with that, or aikido if you've learned some aikido, or combining the two. But I've always enjoyed judo, to the idea that I can stay on my feet if possible.
Now, so much of what we consider, of what we know of the martial arts, it really was invented by Jigoro Kano, right? The fact that we wear gis and we have belts with different colors, and the way you line up, and he invented a lot of that, didn't he?
So I'm not the best at the history of judo, but what it came from was, in Japan you had jiu-jitsu, which was the art of basically, if you had on armor and you had a sword and you were in battle, if your sword was broken, or you lost a sword, or you couldn't afford a sword, a lot of the guys were poor, and so if you couldn't afford a sword, you basically would try to basically armbar somebody, choke them, push them on the ground so somebody else could come and stab them, or use different farm implements for weapons and stuff like that. And the armor that they wore, you couldn't kick and punch. It was just, it was wood, or it was
Wood and
bamboo,
leather, yeah.
or whatever they could fashion, that they could afford. And so what happened was, they would learn these skills to try to break people's arms, choke the person until they're dead or incapacitated. And if you ended up on the ground, somebody else would come up and probably stab you, or with a spear or with a sword or whatever, and then you would be dead. So what happened was, Japan was trying to be more like the West, and so the emperor basically was convinced that they needed to get rid of samurais, and this was in the towards the middle 1800s to the late 1900s. And so what they did was, they outlawed the type of martial arts that were violent at the time, to try to be more like the West. So Dr. Kano, he was he was in college, or he was a professor or something similar. He was looking for a way to continue jiu-jitsu. He had trained in jiu-jitsu at a couple different schools, if I recall. And so he said, well, what if I take out the most violent things that are in jiu-jitsu? Because again, it was meant for self-defense and kill people. Take the techniques that are most effective and use them for basically more of a sport, instead of going for the groin and trying to a lot of the techniques in jiu-jitsu were to basically maim somebody, to break their knees, or to break their elbows, things like that. And then he took a bunch of different martial arts techniques that he'd learned through his studies. Some of it was sumo, some of it was from American wrestling, different things like that. And he convinced them to allow him to train in this new martial arts. And it was very similar to jiu-jitsu, but he put a premium on being thrown to the ground, because that's what they did with jiu-jitsu initially. Because if you ended up on the ground, there's a good chance you were going to get stabbed or killed by somebody. And so that is basically where judo came from. They at one point, they still had some outlying schools that did jiu-jitsu, and they had a competition to see what they were going to train their police officers. And judo, the school was called the Kodokan. They entered, and then a lot of these other jiu-jitsu schools, and judo did really well. And so they chose judo as the school that they were going to train their law enforcement with. So over time, a lot of these smaller schools, they basically started becoming part of judo. So they sent their students over to the Kodokan, and they, some of the katas from judo have a series of chokes or arm bars or attacks that were part of those old jiu-jitsu styles.
Yeah.
And
When I
again,
started judo, there was kata.
and all all judo has kata. It's basically a lot of schools, they just don't prefer to do the katas.
Yeah.
You have to have, you know, a person that's tori, the person doing the throws or doing the attacks, and then you have to have uke. They're the person receiving the attacks, and they have to be trained together so that they do it as it's so somebody can watch the series of throws or holds or whatever they are in sequence, and they make sense, and they're done, you know, a certain way. Some people specialize in that. They still have competitions for that. You can go to competitions just for that. So,
Man. So what's next for you? What's the future hold for Dell?
well, you know, in some ways, I feel like I'm where I need to be. I enjoy. I'm still training all three martial arts. I'm keeping busy with that. I enjoy. You know, I hate to go on trips and stuff like that because I feel like I'm missing out on a lot of stuff that happens here. So I really don't have. I'm just enjoying being retired and kind of making. You know, making my own plans and making my own decisions and not really having anybody telling me what I cannot do. It's been a pleasure.
Now I
So
do want to tell one quick story, um, because I didn't know you very well when I reached out to you and asked if we could shoot one of the scenes of Lion Killer there. You were gracious. Like I said, your place is phenomenal. And I knew it that you told me at that time, because we're looking for extras, that you couldn't be in it because of your job. So I knew in law enforcement, I didn't know if you were undercover. I didn't know what was, was like, hey, this guy's he's into something, this guy. But I remember you came to the premiere of Lion Killer we had, and I remember kind of like watching you navigate the space. I don't know if you knew, not very long, but I kind of watched you navigate the space. And how tall are you?
6'2".
And do you mind if I ask how much you weigh?
Right now around 205.
Well, about that time it was probably the same, but you're one of the more physically imposing people there, But if I asked anybody if they remembered you, I guarantee nobody. You were like a ninja. It's like because I remember, I think I asked a couple people, like, did you see that? You see his name's Dell? No, no, no. Um, and I have to say I don't think you intentionally meant to do that, but I think it was just your way of navigating spaces, not bringing attention to yourself. Um, and then I think, was it that day you'd given me a shirt?
Yes. Yes.
So you give me the shirt, and of course on the shirt it says United States Secret Service on it. And I'm like, okay, that's what he does for a living. That's why he's like, you were just there, but you weren't there, if that makes sense. Was that due to your training, or that wasn't intentional? I don't think.
It wasn't really intentional. I was just I felt very blessed to be there and be part of it. And so I really appreciate that you invited me. And I was just, trying to make sure you could enjoy the moment, and I wasn't getting in the way of anybody that was
You were
enjoying.
undercover. You were looking for somebody. Tell the truth. Somebody there did something. No, but I was.
Luckily, nobody did anything.
um,
You can never tell when you get in big groups. That's another thing. I've never been a big I don't enjoy big concerts or anything like that. I don't try to go out of my way to be in big groups and things like that. I'll go to the theater and stuff like that. But part of going to all these political events, that have 15 to 100,000 people, you start wishing you were just in your dojo with just the people that you enjoy being around.
absolutely.
But no, it was an absolute pleasure being there for your premiere of your movie, and I was so glad to see that you'd gotten several awards and got a lot of great attention. And anybody that'll listen to me, I try to convince them to watch your movie and check it out.
I appreciate what I try to capture that spirit that you kind of demonstrate, which is that like we said before, that spirit of sensei, and I think you're a perfect embodiment of that. That being said, do you have any advice to offer all your years of study in the martial arts? What's the advice you'd like to pay forward to the future generation?
I guess the biggest part is enjoy the journey. I feel like a lot of people, they set their goals to get a certain belt or to win tournaments, specific tournaments or things like that. I think a lot of martial arts is the, self-defense and making it part of who you are, so that you actually get in a situation where you need to defend yourself, your body just reacts. And I've heard many, many stories of that, where people get in certain situations and their body just takes over. And I always see white belts, they come in and you're showing them a certain hold or a certain technique, and they literally have no clue what to do. And they're just kind of laying there in like the fetal position. And they're like, oh, I'm trying. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And that's why I think martial arts is so important, especially for these days where it seems like a lot of people are attacked for different various reasons on the street. And if you watch Forensic Files, shows like that, you see that a lot of people that defend themselves or try to escape will actually escape these days. But the person that says, oh, I'll let you, do this or that to me, that those are the people that end up getting killed, because they think that by appeasing the person that's kidnapped them or is attacking them, that they'll be left alone later. It just doesn't seem like the case. I think the majority of the people that defend themselves, or they're willing to open the car door and jump out when the car's moving, things like that, or draw attention to themselves, yelling police or running away and going in a circle around a car so the person can't grab them. Those are the people that survive, I think. So I would say, don't worry about the belts. Just worry about learning a martial arts that you can defend yourself, and find a group of people that you can train with, that you enjoy being with, so that, it's an enjoyable place to go to, and it doesn't feel like you're not having a good time where you're there. So that would be the biggest part. And if you have kids that you think self-defense is important, or they're a single kid and they don't have brothers and sisters, and they don't get the hard play that brothers and sisters get, find jiu-jitsu, a school like that, or judo, something where they can get down and grapple with somebody. And I see it all the time, where kids that'll show up with 2 or 3 brothers and sisters, they're rough and tumble, they fall down, they just run, jump right back up and start wrestling or trying again. But kids that are, their parents are very careful with them. They get their hands washed before they eat their food. If they fall down, the parent runs over and picks them up and says, oh, it's all right, and gives them a hug while they're crying. It's like they have so much more difficulty, in the real world, compared to the kid that drops their hot dog on the ground. The parent picks it up, brushes it off, hands it to them, like, you're okay, you can eat that. Being in a rough and tumble martial arts, I think, is super, super helpful.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, and hopefully I can get out there and train with you, and you have an open invitation to come out here, train with me anytime you want, though.
Thank you so much, my friend. I really would love to do that, and I really hope you're able to make it out here at any time you want, my friend. Mi casa es su casa.
Same here. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
And that's my conversation with the very fascinating Dale Conkright. If you're ever in the greater Houston area and want to train with him and check out his beautiful dojo in Hockley, Texas, his links are in the description. You can also follow my new graphic novel, The Gentleman's Guild. Yes, I'm making a graphic novel. It's called The Gentleman's Guild with artist Ebi Canales. You can sign up for the mailing list now. The link for that is also in the description. And don't forget to watch Lion Killer, my debut feature film. That's right, I made a movie. It's called Lion Killer. It stars Regina Ting-Chen, who's currently on season 4 of Stranger Things. You can watch it at Amazon Prime, Tubi TV, Freevee, the Roku channel, or you can pop on over to the YouTube channel called V Movies. And thanks for watching this episode of FURYCAST. Well, that's it for today's show. I want to thank you for watching. Make sure you like this video, comment down below, or simply leave me a pound FURYCAST. You can also subscribe to the channel, and yes, hit the bell for notifications. Till next time, peace.